Daniel's alarm blared at 5:30 in the morning, piercing the quiet darkness of their small apartment. He rolled out of bed, his muscles aching from yesterday's double shift at the garage. The floorboards creaked under his feet as he made his way to the kitchen, careful not to wake Emily. The kitchen was cramped but tidy. Morning light hadn't yet reached their window, and Daniel moved through familiar motions in the dim glow of the overhead light. He pulled out the container of oatmeal, the cheap kind that came in bulk, and set water to boil. As he measured out portions, he checked the cabinet again, hoping he'd miscounted yesterday. They were running low on everything. "Good morning, sweetie," he called out when he heard Emily's bedroom door open. She appeared in her favorite purple pajamas, her dark hair a tangled mess. "Morning, Dad," she yawned. Climbing onto one of their mismatched kitchen chairs, Daniel stirred the oatmeal, adding a sprinkle of brown sugar, one of their few luxuries. "Did you finish your homework last night?" "Uh-huh," Emily nodded, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Miss Thompson said my essay was really good. That's my girl." Daniel smiled, setting a steaming bowl in front of her. He popped 2 pieces of bread in their ancient toaster, the spring mechanism sticking slightly. While Emily ate, Daniel packed her lunch with practiced efficiency. 1 peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut diagonally the way she liked it. An apple he'd gotten on sale. A small bag of carrots. He wished he could add more, but the groceries had to last until payday. "Dad?" Emily's voice was quiet. "Aren't you having breakfast?" Daniel forced a smile. "Already ate while you were getting up." The lie felt heavy, but he couldn't let her worry. His stomach growled softly, and he turned to the sink to hide his grimace. The morning rushed by in their usual routine. Emily brushed her teeth while Daniel braided her hair. She changed into her school clothes. They were clean but well worn, and Daniel noticed her jeans were getting short at the ankles again. "Got everything?" Daniel asked as they headed for the door. "Homework? Lunch?" Emily patted her backpack. "All set." The drive to school was short, their old sedan protesting slightly in the cool morning air. Daniel watched Emily walk into the building, her ponytail bouncing with each step. Pride and worry twisted in his chest. She was growing up so fast, and he was doing his best to keep up. The workday dragged. Daniel's hands were steady as he replaced a transmission, but his mind kept wandering to Emily. When his lunch break came, he drank water and pretended the gnawing in his stomach wasn't there. That afternoon, he picked Emily up from school right on time. She climbed into the car with her usual smile, but something seemed different. Her movements were slower, more careful. "How was school, sweetheart?" "Good," she said, but her voice was quieter than usual. Back home, Daniel noticed Emily's lunchbox was completely empty, not even a stray carrot remained. Usually, she left at least a few vegetables behind. While Emily worked on her homework at the kitchen table, Daniel prepared a simple dinner of pasta with sauce from a jar. Over their plates of spaghetti, Daniel cleared his throat. "Emily, honey, did you eat all your lunch today?" Emily's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her cheeks flushed pink, and she set it down slowly. "Well, you can tell me anything. You know that, right?" She nodded, looking down at her plate. "There's a new boy in my class. Miguel. He didn't have any lunch." Her voice got very small. "He looked so hungry, Dad. I couldn't eat while he just sat there." Daniel's heart squeezed in his chest. "So you gave him your lunch?" Emily nodded again, then looked up quickly. "Are you mad?" "No, honey." Daniel reached across the table and took her small hand in his calloused one. "I'm not mad at all. That was very kind of you." "Really? Really?" He squeezed her hand. "But next time, maybe we can figure out a way to help that doesn't mean you go hungry too, okay?" Emily's face brightened. "Could we pack an extra sandwich tomorrow?" Daniel's throat tightened. He thought about their nearly empty bread bag, the last few spoonfuls of peanut butter. But looking at Emily's hopeful face, he couldn't say no. "We'll figure something out." After dinner, they followed their usual bedtime routine. Emily changed into her pajamas while Daniel washed the dishes. They read a chapter from her favorite book together, Emily curled against his side on her bed. "Time for prayers," Daniel said softly, marking their place in the book. Emily folded her hands and closed her eyes. "Dear God, thank you for Dad and for our home. Please help Miguel and his family, and please help us find a way to share more lunches." Amen. Daniel's voice was rough as he added his own quiet amen. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders and kissed her forehead. Good night, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too, Dad. Daniel turned off her light and closed the door partway, just how she liked it. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall for a moment, overwhelmed by the mix of emotions in his chest. Pride in Emily's generous heart. Worry about their own situation. Fear that he wasn't providing enough. In his own room, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. The springs creaked under his weight, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emily's soft breathing from the next room. His daughter had such a beautiful soul. She'd seen someone in need and hadn't hesitated to help, even at her own expense, just like her mother would have done. The thought brought both comfort and fresh pain. Sarah would have known exactly how to handle this situation. Daniel looked at the framed photo on his nightstand. Emily as a toddler, Sarah holding her, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. His chest ached with familiar grief, but tonight it was mixed with a new worry. How could he keep Emily's compassionate spirit alive while making sure she took care of herself too? How would they manage if she kept giving away her lunch? The next morning's sky hung heavy with gray clouds as Daniel's old pickup truck pulled into the school parking lot. He glanced at his watch, 20 minutes earlier than their usual arrival time. Emily bounced in her seat, clutching her backpack decorated with carefully sewn-on patches that covered worn spots. "You're sure you don't mind being early, sweetheart?" Daniel asked, putting the truck in park. "Nope. I can read my library book before class starts." Emily's smile lit up her whole face as she gathered her things. Daniel watched her skip toward the school entrance, her brown ponytail swinging with each step. Instead of pulling away, he reached for his phone and pretended to check his messages. His eyes scanned the schoolyard, searching for the boy Emily had mentioned. It didn't take long to spot him. A small figure sat alone on a bench near the playground, shoulders slightly hunched, wearing a navy blue jacket that seemed a size too big. The boy's eyes were fixed on an open book, but Daniel noticed he hadn't turned a page in several minutes. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel stepped out of his truck. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle the child. "Good morning," he said softly. "You must be Miguel?" The boy looked up, his dark eyes wary but gentle. "Yes, sir," he answered politely, closing his book. "I'm Emily's dad," Daniel explained, offering a warm smile. "She told me about sharing lunch with you yesterday." Miguel's cheeks flushed slightly. "Emily is very kind," he said quietly. "I told her she didn't have to." Before Daniel could respond, hurried footsteps approached from behind. A woman in her late 30s rushed toward them, her black hair escaping from a hastily tied bun. She wore clean but wrinkled clothes, and exhaustion lined her face. "Miguel." "Lo siento. Mi amor," she called out, slightly out of breath. The car wouldn't start right away, and she stopped short when she noticed Daniel, immediately straightening her posture. "Mama, this is Emily's father," Miguel explained quickly. Daniel extended his hand. "Daniel Miller." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Rosa Alvarez," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Please, just Rosa." Her eyes darted between Daniel and Miguel, a mix of worry and pride crossing her features. Miguel stood up and moved closer to his mother, as if trying to offer silent support. The gesture wasn't lost on Daniel. It was the same protective instinct he often saw in Emily. "I wanted to thank your daughter," Rosa said, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. "Miguel told me what she did. But please, she doesn't need to share her lunch. She hesitated. "We manage." Before Daniel could respond, a familiar voice rang out across the schoolyard. "Miguel! Mr. Alvarez!" Emily came running toward them, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She skidded to a stop beside Miguel, beaming. "This is my dad, and you must be Miguel's mom. Miguel's my new friend. He knows all about space and taught me about constellations yesterday." The adult's tension melted slightly in the warmth of Emily's enthusiasm. Miguel's face brightened as he nodded, adding softly, "Emily likes the same books I do." Daniel noticed Rosa trying to discreetly check her watch. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" he asked. I noticed you mentioned car trouble. Rosa shook her head quickly. No, thank you. We'll be fine. But Daniel caught the flicker of worry in her eyes, the way she unconsciously pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. Wait here, Daniel said suddenly, heading back to his truck. He returned with a small paper bag of groceries he'd meant to take to work for his lunch this week. Some fruit, crackers, and a couple of sandwiches he'd made ahead. Please, he offered, holding out the bag. It's not much, but Rosa took a step back. I couldn't possibly. Please, Mrs. Alvarez, Emily chimed in, her eyes wide and hopeful. Miguel can have my apple at lunch too. Daddy always packs me extra fruit. Something in Emily's innocent plea seemed to crack Rosa's careful facade. Her eyes welled with tears. She quickly blinked away. With trembling hands, she accepted the bag. Gracias, she whispered. You are too kind. The first bell rang, startling them all. Emily grabbed Miguel's hand. Come on! We can look at my constellation book before class. The two children hurried toward the building, Miguel throwing one last grateful look over his shoulder at his mother. Rosa clutched the grocery bag close. We lost our apartment last month, she admitted quietly. I'm trying to find steady work. But, she straightened her shoulders. We will be okay. Miguel is strong, like his mother, Daniel said gently. They exchanged a look of understanding, two parents doing their best against impossible odds. That evening, after a simple dinner of spaghetti, Emily sat cross-legged on their worn couch, practically vibrating with excitement. Daddy, can I share my lunch with Miguel every day? Please? He told me all about the Orion constellation, and we're going to read the same book from the library. And Daniel watched his daughter's animated face, his heart swelling with pride, even as worry gnawed at his stomach. Their own budget was stretched thin, but Emily's compassion touched something deep inside him. He thought of Rosa's dignity in the face of hardship, of Miguel's gentle resilience. Of course you can share, sweetheart, he said softly, ruffling her hair. The joy that lit up Emily's face was worth every sacrifice he'd have to make to keep that promise. Daniel was elbow-deep in a car's engine when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Wiping his greasy hands on a shop rag, he checked the caller ID. His heart skipped when he saw Franklin Elementary flash across the screen. Hello, this is Daniel Miller, he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Miller, this is Principal Hargrove's office. We need you to come in regarding an incident involving Emily today. Daniel's stomach clenched. Is she hurt? No, sir, but we need to discuss a behavioral issue. Can you come now? 20 minutes later, Daniel hurried through the school's front doors, still in his work uniform with traces of motor oil on his hands despite scrubbing them clean. The secretary directed him to Principal Hargrove's office, where Emily sat in an oversized chair, her feet barely touching the ground. Principal Hargrove, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood up from behind his desk. Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller. He gestured to an empty chair next to Emily. Please, have a seat. Daniel sat down, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. What's this about? The principal cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, we've become aware that Emily has been sharing her lunch with another student. While the sentiment island, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Admirable. It violates our cafeteria policies. Policies? Daniel's voice rose slightly. My daughter saw someone hungry and shared her food. What's wrong with that? Principal Hargrove's expression remained neutral. There are liability issues to consider. Food allergies, dietary restrictions. Plus, it sets a concerning precedent. He shuffled some papers on his desk. We believe Emily should focus on her own needs during lunch period. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. Her own needs? He looked at Emily, who was studying the floor, her shoulders slumped. My daughter saw someone in need and showed kindness. That's exactly what we should be teaching our kids. Mr. Miller, Principal Hargrove's tone grew firmer. We have programs in place for students who need assistance with meals. Taking matters into their own hands isn't appropriate. Programs that Miguel's family might not know about yet, Daniel countered, or might be too proud to ask for. He leaned forward in his chair. Emily didn't break a rule. She showed compassion. That should never be punished. The principal's lips thinned. No one is being punished, Mr. Miller. We're simply establishing boundaries. Boundaries against kindness? Daniel stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Come on, Emily. We're done here. Emily scrambled to her feet, clutching her backpack. The principal called after them. Mr. Miller, we haven't finished our discussion. Yes, we have, Daniel said firmly, guiding Emily toward the door. As they walked down the hallway, Daniel heard voices near the front entrance. School was letting out, and parents were gathering to pick up their children. Through the glass doors, he saw Rosa standing quietly to the side, waiting for Miguel. Look at them, a woman's voice carried from nearby. These people who don't belong here. Taking advantage. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at Rosa through the window, saw how she kept her eyes down, pretending not to hear. Miguel stood close to her, their hands clasped tightly together. The drive home was quiet. Emily stared out the window, her usual chatter absent. When they pulled into their driveway, she finally spoke. Am I in trouble, Dad? Daniel turned off the engine and faced his daughter. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. But Principal Hargrove said, sometimes adults forget what's really important, Daniel interrupted gently. Sharing your lunch with Miguel was a beautiful thing to do. Don't let anyone tell you different. Emily's face brightened a little. Really? Really? He gave her a hug. Now, how about we make some mac and cheese for dinner? Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel sat at their small kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. He held a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, his mind replaying the day's events. The principal's words echoed in his head, along with the cruel whispers he'd overheard. He thought of Rosa's dignified silence in the face of prejudice, of Miguel's gentle presence beside his mother. His daughter's simple act of kindness had unveiled an ugly truth. Some people would rather maintain their comfortable barriers than extend a helping hand. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. Tomorrow he'd have to return to work, face his mounting bills, and figure out how to protect Emily's generous spirit while teaching her to navigate a world that sometimes punished compassion. But for now, in the quiet of his kitchen, he let himself feel the full weight of it all. The pride in his daughter's actions, the anger at the principal's response, and the growing certainty that standing up for what was right meant standing up not just for Emily, but for Rosa and Miguel too. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time as Daniel sat there, his cold coffee forgotten, shoulders heavy with the knowledge that this was just the beginning of a bigger battle, one that would test not just his courage, but his faith in humanity's capacity for kindness. The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains of Daniel's small apartment kitchen. He stood at the stove, spatula in hand, trying to hide his nervousness as he flipped another pancake. The sizzle of butter on the griddle filled the air, along with the sweet aroma of vanilla and maple syrup. These are getting better, he muttered to himself, examining the golden brown circle. His first few attempts had been less than perfect, but he was determined to make this morning special. In the living room, Emily and Miguel sat cross-legged on the carpet, engaged in an intense game of Go Fish. Their laughter echoed through the apartment, making the modest space feel warmer somehow. Rosa sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She'd initially declined the invitation, making excuses about not wanting to impose, but Emily's eager pleading had worn down her resistance. You really don't have to go to all this trouble, Rosa said softly, watching Daniel prepare another batch of batter. Daniel shook his head. It's no trouble at all. Besides, Emily's been talking about this all week. He glanced over his shoulder with a gentle smile. Though I should warn you, I'm not exactly a master chef. Papa! Emily called out, bouncing into the kitchen with Miguel following shyly behind her. Are they ready yet? Miguel's never had homemade pancakes before. Daniel's heart squeezed at that simple statement. He'd noticed Miguel's eyes grow wide at the sight of the modest spread. Fresh pancakes, a small bowl of strawberries, and maple syrup they'd splurged on for the occasion. Almost ready, sweetheart. Why don't you and Miguel help set the table? The children eagerly grabbed plates from the cabinet, their heads barely reaching the shelf. Daniel noticed how carefully Miguel handled each dish, as if they were made of precious crystal instead of worn ceramic. As they settled around the small table, shoulders almost touching in the cramped space, Rosa's reserve began to melt. The children's enthusiasm was contagious. And soon even she was laughing at Daniel's story about his first disastrous attempt at making pancakes when Emily was younger. The smoke alarm went off. Emily giggled, syrup dripping down her chin. The whole building had to evacuate. That's not exactly how it happened, Daniel protested. But he was grinning too. During a lull in the conversation, while the kids were focused on their second helpings, Rosa's expression grew more serious. I want to thank you both, she said quietly, for everything. It's been difficult since Fernando passed away. Daniel set his fork down, listening intently as Rosa continued. I worked as a housekeeper for this wealthy family in the suburbs. Everything was fine at first, but then they started paying me late, making excuses. She looked down at her plate. The last month, they refused to pay at all. Claimed I'd broken something valuable. I couldn't prove otherwise, and without those wages. Her voice trailed off. Daniel nodded, understanding all too well how quickly things could spiral. After Emily's mother left, he said carefully, watching his daughter who was thankfully absorbed in showing Miguel how to make a smiley face with syrup. I thought I had to be both parents. Tried to work double shifts, be home more, do everything perfect. Nearly drove myself crazy before I realized perfect isn't possible. We just do our best. Rosa's eyes met his, filled with recognition. Sometimes the best doesn't feel good enough. But it is, Daniel said firmly. Look at them. He gestured to their children, who were now giggling over Miguel's lopsided syrup artwork. Emily suddenly perked up, catching the tail end of their conversation. I have the best idea, she exclaimed. Miguel and I were talking. What if we had a sharing table at school? Like, if kids have extra food, they could leave it there for anyone who needs it. Miguel nodded enthusiastically, speaking up for the first time since breakfast began. Then nobody would have to go hungry, and nobody would know who needed the food. Daniel and Rosa exchanged surprised looks. The simple brilliance of children, seeing straight through to solutions adults might overthink. That's actually a really thoughtful idea, Daniel said, already considering how it might work. Rosa's eyes shone with pride as she looked at Miguel. Mi hijo inteligente, she whispered. After breakfast, as the morning stretched toward noon, Daniel suggested a walk to the small park down the street. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under their feet as they made their way down the sidewalk. Emily and Miguel raced ahead, their small hands clasped together as they skipped over cracks in the cement. Don't go too far, Daniel called out, though they stayed within sight. He and Rosa walked more slowly, a comfortable silence between them. The morning had changed something, eased a tension neither had realized was there. They watched their children playing, both lost in their own thoughts about the challenges ahead. But somehow those challenges seemed less daunting now. Your daughter, Rosa said finally. She has such a beautiful heart. Daniel nodded, throat tight with emotion. So does Miguel. You've raised an incredible boy, Rosa. She ducked her head, but he caught her smile. They paused at the park entrance, watching Emily and Miguel tackle a pile of leaves, their joyful shrieks filling the air. In that moment, standing beside Rosa, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The weight of facing everything alone. A leaf drifted down, landing on Rosa's dark hair. Without thinking, Daniel reached out to brush it away, then quickly pulled his hand back. Sorry, it's okay, Rosa said softly. And for a moment they just stood there, understanding passing between them without words. The children's laughter drew their attention back to the present, and they continued their walk, two parents finding strength in shared struggles and unexpected friendship. The classroom buzzed with morning energy as Emily stood in front of her fifth-grade class, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Her heart thumped against her chest, but she remembered her dad's words from that morning. Being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared. I have an idea, she announced, her voice trembling slightly. What if we had a sharing table, where anyone could leave extra snacks they don't want, and anyone who needs food could take some? A few snickers echoed from the back of the room. Emily's cheeks grew warm, but she stood her ground, glancing at Miguel, who sat quietly in the third row. He gave her a small, encouraging smile. Mrs. Peterson, their teacher, stepped forward. That's an interesting idea, Emily. Would you like to explain more? Emily nodded, gaining confidence. Sometimes people pack too much food, or they don't like what they brought. Instead of throwing it away, they could put it on the sharing table. Then if someone forgot their lunch or is still hungry, they could take something. That's stupid, Tommy whispered from the back, but Sarah, who sat near the front, raised her hand. I think it's a good idea, Sarah said. My mom always packs me 2 cookies, but I'm only allowed to eat 1. Other hands started going up. Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. Let's give it a try. We can use the small table by the window. 1. Throughout the week, the sharing table slowly came to life. On Tuesday, Sarah left her extra cookie. Wednesday brought apple slices from Jason and half a sandwich from Maria. By Thursday, a small collection of granola bars, fruit, and wrapped snacks appeared regularly. Miguel visited the table quietly, taking only what he needed. Emily noticed how other kids, who sometimes forgot their lunch or didn't have enough, also began using the table. No one made fun of them anymore. It had become just another part of their day. One morning, Pastor James visited their classroom. He had heard about the sharing table from his daughter Sarah and wanted to see it himself. He watched as children naturally shared their extra food and how the whole class had embraced the spirit of giving. That Sunday, Pastor James stood at his pulpit, his voice carrying through the church. A child shall lead them, he began, sharing Emily's story. In our community, a young girl saw hunger and didn't look away. She didn't ask for permission to care. She simply acted with love. The congregation listened intently as he continued. This little girl's action has created a ripple of kindness in her classroom. But why stop there? Why can't we, as adults, learn from her example? By the end of the service, church members had organized a fundraiser. Mrs. Thompson offered her empty apartment above her garage. She'd been meaning to rent it out but hadn't found the right tenants. Others pledged furniture, kitchen supplies, and groceries. When Rosa heard about the offer, tears welled in her eyes. I can't accept such kindness, she whispered to Pastor James. You can, he said gently, and you will. Because accepting help with grace teaches others how to give with grace. That evening, Daniel's old pickup truck pulled up to the small apartment above Mrs. Thompson's garage. Emily bounced excitedly in the back seat while Miguel helped his mother carry their few belongings inside. The apartment was small but clean, with second-hand furniture that made it feel like home. Look, Mama, Miguel called from the tiny kitchen. We have a real stove. Rosa ran her hand along the counter, her eyes bright with tears. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding 2 large pizza boxes, the warmth seeping through the cardboard into his hands. First dinner in your new home, he announced, setting the boxes on the small table that Mrs. Thompson had donated. Paper plates make cleanup easy. Emily helped Miguel set out the plates while Rosa found paper towels in one of the grocery bags the church members had left. The smell of cheese and pepperoni filled the cozy space as they gathered around the table. We should say grace, Miguel suggested shyly. They joined hands, forming a circle around the modest feast. Rosa's soft prayer in Spanish, mixed with Daniel's quiet, Amen. Emily squeezed Miguel's hand before letting go, her face glowing with happiness. This is the best pizza ever, Emily declared, taking a big bite. Everything tastes better in a real home, Miguel agreed, looking around the apartment with wonder. Daniel watched as Rosa relaxed into her chair, the constant worry lines in her forehead softening. She caught his eye and smiled. A real, full smile that reached her eyes. They ate and talked, their laughter floating through the open window into the warm evening air. Emily told stories about the sharing table, how even Tommy had started bringing extra snacks to share. Miguel described his art project for school, now that he had a proper place to do homework. I never thought, Rosa began, then paused to wipe her eyes. I never thought we would have this again. A table. A home. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions, Daniel said, watching Emily proudly. Like sharing a lunch with a new friend. Emily beamed at her father's words, cheese dripping from her slice of pizza. Can we do this again? Having dinner together? Daniel and Rosa exchanged glances, something warm and hopeful passing between them. Yes, they both said at the same time, then laughed. The pizza gradually disappeared, but no one rushed to leave. They sat together in the growing dusk, their hearts full with more than just food. Through the window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, twinkling down on their small celebration. Miguel collected the paper plates, proud to throw them away in their very own trash can. Emily helped Rosa wipe down the table, chattering about plans for school tomorrow. Daniel stood back, watching this simple moment of domestic happiness, knowing that sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in ordinary moments like paper plates and shared pizza. This was more than just dinner. It was the first page of a new chapter, written in cheese-stained paper plates, and the sound of children's laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. It was hope, served one slice at a time. A week had passed since the sharing table began, and the crisp morning air held a hint of autumn. Daniel noticed Rosa's shoulders were tense as they walked their children to the school entrance. Her usual warm smile seemed forced, and she kept glancing around nervously at the other parents. "Rosa?" Daniel touched her arm gently. "Is everything all right?" She waited until Emily and Miguel had run ahead before speaking. "Mrs. Harrison, one of my cleaning clients." Rosa's voice trembled. "She said people are talking. That I'm taking advantage of the church's kindness. That I'm—" She couldn't finish. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd noticed the whispers too, the way some parents pulled their children closer when Rosa approached. "That's ridiculous. You're working hard to get back on your feet, but that's just it." Rosa wrapped her arms around herself. "Mrs. Harrison fired me this morning. Said I was unreliable, but I've never missed a day." I think someone spoke to her. Daniel felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when Emily's mother left, when people had judged him for being a single father. Before he could respond, they heard Emily's voice. "Dad, Rosa!" Emily waved from the school steps, Miguel beside her. "Look how many kids brought stuff for the sharing table today." Rosa managed a smile, but Daniel saw the tears she blinked back. As they watched their children disappear into the building, more whispers floated around them. A group of mothers huddled nearby, their voices carrying just loud enough to hear. "I heard he encourages his daughter to give away her lunch. What kind of father does that? And that woman? Living off church donations while the rest of us work." Daniel stepped closer to Rosa, instinctively protective. "Don't listen to them." Later that afternoon, while picking up Emily from her after-school program, Daniel overheard her talking to her friend Sarah. "Your dad and Miguel's mom are always together now," Sarah said. "Like when my mom started dating Mr. Peterson." Emily's laugh echoed down the hallway. "Maybe they should be a family. Miguel could be my brother." Daniel froze, his hand on the classroom doorknob. The thought hit him with unexpected force. Rosa's gentle strength, her kindness, the way she helped Emily with her homework while he worked late. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it. Dinner together every night, Rosa's laugh filling their small apartment, Miguel's quiet presence completing their family. The dream shattered at Thursday's PTA meeting. Daniel hadn't wanted to attend, but the principal had specifically requested his presence. Rosa sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mrs. Blackwood, the PTA president, stood at the podium discussing upcoming events when Jennifer Parker, one of the wealthier parents, raised her hand. "I think we need to address the situation with the sharing table," Jennifer announced, her voice sharp. "Some parents have expressed concerns about encouraging children to give away food, and there are questions about whether certain individuals are taking advantage of our community's generosity." The room grew silent. Daniel felt Rosa stiffen beside him. Jennifer continued, her gaze fixed on Daniel. "Mr. Miller, while we appreciate your daughter's enthusiasm, some might consider it neglectful to let her go without lunch. And Miss Alvarez." She turned to Rosa. "The church fundraiser was meant to be temporary assistance, not a permanent solution." Emily, who had been coloring quietly in the back of the room, suddenly burst into tears. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Daniel started to stand, ready to defend both Rosa and himself. But Rosa grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It will only make things worse." The meeting ended abruptly. The principal announced that the sharing table would need to be reevaluated. On their way out, they learned the church fundraiser had been suspended pending review. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Rosa and Daniel sat at his small kitchen table. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Rosa's coffee had gone cold, untouched. I should leave, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Find another town, start over. You and Emily don't deserve this trouble. Daniel stared at his own cup, the weight of the decision crushing him. Everything in him wanted to tell her to stay, to fight these prejudices together, but Emily's tears at the meeting haunted him. His daughter had already lost one mother. He couldn't bear to see her hurt again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities slipping away. Outside, a car alarm went off briefly, then faded, leaving them in the quiet of their impossible choice. I won't stop you, Daniel finally managed, though each word felt like betrayal. But I don't want you to go. Rosa looked up, her eyes shining with tears. Sometimes wanting isn't enough, Daniel. Sometimes we have to do what's right, even when it breaks our heart. Rain pattered against the windshield as Daniel's old pickup truck pulled up to the school entrance. The wipers squeaked back and forth, matching the heavy rhythm in his heart. Emily sat beside him, her lunchbox clutched tight against her chest, her usual morning chatter replaced by silence. You okay, sweetie? Daniel asked, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from her face. Emily nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the dashboard. I'm fine, Dad. Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel watched as she slipped out of the truck and hurried through the rain, her shoulders hunched. No skip in her step, no turning back to wave goodbye. His daughter was carrying a weight no child should have to bear. At the auto shop, Daniel couldn't keep his mind on the transmission he was supposed to be fixing. His wrench slipped twice, and he nearly dropped a heavy part on his foot. The rain drummed steadily on the garage roof, each drop feeling like an accusation. Hey, Miller, his boss called out. That carburetor isn't going to fix itself. Sorry, Bob, Daniel mumbled, wiping his greasy hands on his coveralls. But as he bent over the engine again, all he could see was Rosa's face from yesterday, tight with worry and shame. The whispers had gotten to her, cut deep into her pride. During his lunch break, Daniel sat in his truck, sandwich untouched. He pulled out his phone and stared at Rosa's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. But what could he say? How could he convince her to stay when the whole town seemed determined to push her away? The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling like a year. When his phone buzzed at 2:30, his heart jumped. It was Emily's school. His hands trembled as he answered. Mr. Miller? It was Emily's teacher, Mrs. Roberts. Emily's quite upset. She's in the counselor's office. Could you come? Daniel's stomach clenched. I'll be right there. He found Emily curled up in a chair, tears streaming down her face. When she saw him, she launched herself into his arms. Dad, Miguel wasn't at school today. She sobbed into his shirt. And Jenny told me they're leaving. They can't leave, Dad. They're our friends. Daniel held her close, feeling her small body shake with sobs. How do you know they're leaving, sweetie? I heard Miguel tell the teacher. She hiccuped. He said his mom is packing their stuff. They can't leave, Dad. We have to stop them. The counselor gave Daniel a sympathetic look. Emily's been very upset since lunch. Maybe it would be best to take her home early today? The rain had settled into a dreary drizzle as they drove home. Emily's words tumbled out between sniffles. Remember when Mom left? You said we had to be brave and stick together. That's what family does. Rosa and Miguel are like our family now. Please, Dad. Please don't let them go. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Emily was right. He'd been teaching her about courage and kindness, about standing up for what's right. But when things got tough, he'd hesitated. He'd let fear and other people's judgment make him doubt. At home, Emily refused to eat her afternoon snack. She sat at the kitchen window, watching the rain and drawing sad faces on the foggy glass. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed Rosa's number. It went straight to voicemail. His heart sank as he imagined her packing their few belongings, believing she had to run away again. Emily, he said softly, I need to go somewhere. Mrs. Johnson next door will stay with you for a little while. Okay? Emily turned to him, her eyes red but hopeful. Are you going to help Rosa and Miguel? Yes, sweetie, I'm going to try. The church stood solid against the gray sky, its steeple reaching up through the mist. Daniel parked his truck and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. The last time he'd been inside a church was for his wife's goodbye service, right before she left them. But this time, he wasn't here because someone was leaving. He was here to try to make someone stay. Pastor James's office light was on, a warm glow in the gathering dusk. Daniel's work boots squeaked on the polished floor as he walked down the empty hallway. At the door, he took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," called a friendly voice. Daniel stepped inside, his cap clutched in his hands. "Pastor James, I need your help. It's about Rosa and Miguel Alvarez." The pastor looked up from his desk, his kind face creasing with concern. "Daniel Miller, isn't it? Emily's father? Please, sit down. Tell me what's troubling you." Daniel sank into the chair, the words he'd been holding back all day finally spilling out. He told the pastor everything, about Emily's first act of kindness, about the growing friendship between their families, about the cruel rumors and prejudice that were now driving Rosa away. "My daughter taught me something," Daniel finished, his voice rough with emotion. "She showed me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying. I can't let Rosa and Miguel leave like this. Not when they've finally found a place where they belong." The small church glowed with morning sunlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the wooden pews. Daniel sat stiffly in his Sunday best, a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt and the only tie he owned. Emily fidgeted beside him in her blue dress, her small hand gripping as tightly. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wood polish filled the air, but today felt different. Pastor James stood at the pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the congregation. The usual murmur of whispered conversations died down as he cleared his throat. "Today," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I want to talk about something that's been weighing heavily on my heart. We've all heard the story of the Good Samaritan, but sometimes we forget that the greatest lessons of compassion can come from the most unexpected places, even from a child." Daniel felt Emily squeeze his hand. In the pew across the aisle, he spotted Rosa and Miguel, both looking nervous but neat in borrowed church clothes. A few weeks ago, a young girl in our community saw someone in need. She didn't ask questions about where they came from or worry about what others might think. She simply shared her lunch. Pastor James paused, his gaze falling on Emily. That simple act of kindness sparked something beautiful. A sharing table at school, a community coming together. But then something else happened. The congregation shifted uncomfortably. Some heads bowed in shame. Fear crept in. Judgment followed. And suddenly, we forgot the most important teaching of all. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Mrs. Thompson, who had been one of the loudest voices against Rosa, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Peterson, the grocery store owner who had refused to hire Rosa, straightened in his seat. "We've let prejudice and fear divide us," Pastor James continued, his voice growing stronger. "We've forgotten that every single person in this room has needed help at some point. Every one of us has known struggle, known what it means to pray for grace and mercy." Daniel watched as several heads nodded. He felt a lump forming in his throat. "But today, I stand here humbled by the wisdom of a child. Emily Miller showed us what pure faith looks like. She didn't see a stranger. She saw a friend who was hungry. She didn't see a problem. She saw an opportunity to help." Emily's cheeks flushed pink, but she sat up straighter. Miguel caught her eye from across the aisle and gave her a small, grateful smile. "And what about Rosa Alvarez?" Pastor James gestured toward where Rosa sat today. A mother who lost everything but never lost her dignity, her faith, or her determination to give her son a better life. Is this not the very essence of the strength we admire? The resilience we praise in our own stories? Rosa's eyes glistened with tears, but she held her head high. Daniel noticed several women in the congregation nodding, their expressions softening. "And Daniel Miller," the pastor continued, making Daniel's heart skip a beat. "A father who works double shifts to provide for his daughter, yet still finds room in his heart to help others. These are not strangers to be feared. These are members of our family in Christ." The silence in the church was profound. Pastor James let it settle before speaking again, his voice filled with quiet authority. "So today, I ask you, what will we choose? Will we let fear win, Or will we follow the example of a child who reminded us what it truly means to love our neighbor? Suddenly, Mrs. Baker stood up from her pew. She was known for her work with the church's food bank. "I have an empty apartment above my garage," she announced, her voice wavering but determined. "Rosa and Miguel are welcome to stay there as long as they need." Before Daniel could process this, Mr. Peterson rose as well. "I need help at the store," he said gruffly. "Regular hours, fair pay. The job's yours if you want it, Mrs. Alvarez." One by one, people began to stand. Mrs. Thompson offered to watch Miguel after school while Rosa worked. The Johnson family volunteered to help move their belongings. The choir director mentioned Rosa's beautiful voice and invited her to join them. Emily bounced in her seat, her face glowing with joy. Daniel watched as Rosa covered her mouth with her hand, tears flowing freely now. Miguel leaned against his mother, his own eyes wide with wonder at the outpouring of support. Pastor James smiled gently from the pulpit. "This," he said softly, "this is what community looks like. This is what faith in action means." When the service ended, people gathered around Rosa and Miguel, offering hugs, handshakes, and sincere apologies. Emily darted across the aisle and threw her arms around Rosa, who bent down to embrace her tightly. "Thank you," Rosa whispered into Emily's hair, her voice thick with emotion. "You started all of this with your beautiful heart." Daniel stood back, watching the scene unfold. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, the colors more vivid. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Pastor James standing beside him. "Sometimes," the pastor said quietly, "it takes a child to remind us of our better angels." Later, as Daniel drove Rosa and Miguel back to their temporary apartment, the car was filled with a different kind of silence than before, one of peace rather than fear. Emily and Miguel chatted in the back seat about school tomorrow, making plans for lunch together at the sharing table. Rosa sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The worry lines that had creased her forehead for weeks had softened. As they pulled up to the apartment building, she turned to Daniel, her eyes bright with newfound hope. "Maybe," she said softly, "we're not alone after all." Monday morning arrived with unusual brightness, the autumn sun warming the school's brick walls. Students filed into the gymnasium, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as they settled onto the bleachers. Emily sat between Daniel and Rosa, her small hand clutching Miguel's as Principal Hargrove approached the microphone at center court. The principal cleared his throat, his usually stern expression softened. "Good morning, students and parents. We're here today because sometimes it takes a child to remind us adults what really matters." Daniel watched as Emily's cheeks flushed pink. Rosa squeezed Miguel's shoulder gently, and the boy ducked his head shyly. "2 weeks ago, one of our students showed us what true kindness looks like," Principal Hargrove continued, his voice carrying across the hushed gymnasium. "Emily Miller saw a fellow student in need and chose to help, even though it meant breaking our rules." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "Sometimes rules need to change when they stand in the way of doing what's right." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel felt his throat tighten as he watched Emily sit up straighter. "Starting today, we're proud to announce our new sharing table program," Principal Hargrove announced. "Any student who wishes to share extra food items may do so, and any student who needs a little extra is welcome to take what they need. No questions asked, no judgment given." Applause erupted from the bleachers. Emily's classmates turned to beam at her, and even some of the kids who had once teased her were now smiling and clapping. "Emily Miller and Miguel Alvarez, would you please come down here?" Daniel gave Emily a gentle nudge, and Rosa whispered something encouraging to Miguel. The two children made their way down the bleachers, their footsteps echoing in the quiet gym. Principal Hargrove presented them each with a certificate of appreciation. "These two students remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes." More applause filled the gymnasium. Emily's face glowed with pride as she held up her certificate, and Miguel managed a shy smile that lit up his whole face. After the assembly, as families filed out of the gymnasium, the pastor from the local church approached Rosa. Daniel stood nearby, pretending to help Emily with her backpack while listening intently. "Mrs. Alvarez," the pastor said warmly, "we've been impressed by your grace through all of this. Our church secretary is retiring next month, and we'd love to offer you the position, full-time, with benefits." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Are you serious? Very serious, the pastor smiled. We need someone organized, bilingual, and most importantly, someone with a kind heart. You've shown all of those qualities. Daniel watched as tears welled in Rosa's eyes. She managed to thank the pastor, her voice thick with emotion. Miguel hugged his mother's waist, understanding that something wonderful had just happened. The good news didn't stop there. Later that morning, when Daniel arrived at the auto shop where he worked, his boss called him into the office. Daniel entered nervously, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Miller, his boss said, leaning back in his chair. You've been here what, 6 years now? 7 next month, sir. 7 years. Never missed a day, never complained about staying late. His boss nodded thoughtfully. The way you've handled yourself these past few weeks, standing up for what's right, taking care of your girl. Well, it shows character. We're promoting you to lead mechanic. Comes with a decent raise. Daniel stood there, stunned. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep being the same stand-up guy you've always been. His boss extended his hand, and Daniel shook it firmly. The days seemed to float by in a happy blur. At lunch, Emily's classmates crowded around the new sharing table, proudly placing extra sandwiches, fruit, and snacks. Miguel no longer had to feel embarrassed about taking what he needed. Other kids were doing the same, and no one batted an eye. As evening settled over the city, Daniel's small apartment filled with the aroma of Rosa's cooking. She had insisted on making dinner to celebrate, bringing ingredients for her grandmother's enchilada recipe. The kitchen was warm and cozy as they worked together, Daniel following Rosa's instructions while Emily and Miguel set the table. Can you believe all this? Daniel asked softly as he chopped onions beside Rosa. She shook her head, smiling. God works in mysterious ways, she replied, carefully rolling another enchilada. Through the hearts of children, especially when they finally sat down to eat, the table looked like a feast compared to their usual simple meals. Steam rose from the dish of enchiladas, and Rosa had even managed to make Spanish rice and beans. Emily couldn't stop grinning as she looked around at their makeshift family. This is the best day ever, she declared, reaching for Miguel's hand on one side and her father's on the other. Can we do this every week, please? Daniel glanced at Rosa, their eyes meeting across the table. The warmth in her smile made his heart skip a beat. I think that would be wonderful, Rosa said quietly, and Miguel nodded enthusiastically beside her. Emily bounced in her seat. Really? Every Monday? Every Monday, Rosa confirmed, reaching over to smooth Emily's hair. We can take turns cooking. Maybe your father can learn to make something besides pancakes. Daniel laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Hey, my pancakes are famous. Famously flat, Emily giggled, and even Miguel joined in the laughter. The apartment filled with the sounds of clinking forks, warm conversation, and occasional bursts of laughter. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual evening activity, but inside this small apartment, something precious had taken root. A new kind of family, grown from one simple act of kindness. As they shared the meal together, Daniel watched Emily chattering happily with Miguel. Saw Rosa's eyes sparkle with joy, and felt a deep sense of gratitude settle in his chest. Sometimes the best gifts came wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes the smallest gestures could change everything. The October breeze carried the sweet scent of fallen leaves across Jefferson Park as families gathered for the community picnic. Red and gold maples swayed overhead, their branches casting dancing shadows on the checkered blankets spread across the grass. Children's laughter echoed from the playground, where Emily and Miguel took turns pushing each other on the swings. Daniel sat on a worn plaid blanket, watching his daughter's face light up with each arc toward the sky. Next to him, Rosa arranged paper plates and napkins, her movements careful and deliberate. She looked different now, more relaxed, her shoulders no longer carrying the weight of constant worry. Her new church office job had given her more than just financial stability. It had restored her dignity. Sometimes I still can't believe all of this, Rosa said softly, gesturing to the crowd of familiar faces. Mrs. Thompson from the church choir was setting up a table of homemade cookies. The Hendersons, whose daughter Sarah had become one of Emily's closest friends, were organizing games for the younger children. Even Principal Hargrove had shown up, wearing jeans instead of his usual suit, looking almost approachable as he helped set up folding chairs. Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. From one lunch to all of this, he mused, watching as Emily showed Miguel how to pump his legs to swing higher. Who would have thought? Your daughter did, Rosa replied, her dark eyes warm with affection. She never doubted for a moment that sharing her sandwich would make a difference. More families arrived, each bringing dishes to share. The potluck table groaned under the weight of casseroles, salads, and desserts. Someone had even made a banner that read, "Kindness grows here," in bright, cheerful letters. It hung between two trees, fluttering in the autumn wind. Emily and Miguel raced over to the blanket, their cheeks flushed from playing. "Dad! Mrs. Henderson says they're going to start the games soon." Emily bounced on her toes, excitement radiating from her small frame. "Can Miguel and I join?" "Of course, mija," Rosa answered, smoothing Miguel's wild hair. "But first, come eat something." They gathered around the blanket, passing paper plates loaded with potato salad, fresh rolls, and grilled chicken. Daniel couldn't help but notice how different this meal felt from those quiet dinners just months ago, when it had been just him and Emily, both of them trying to fill the silence. "Remember when you first caught me giving away my lunch, Dad?" Emily asked between bites of watermelon. "You looked so worried." Daniel chuckled, reaching out to wipe juice from her chin with a napkin. "I was worried. Not about sharing. Never about that. I just didn't want you going hungry." "I was never hungry," Emily declared. "I felt full here." She patted her chest, right over her heart. Rosa reached across the blanket and squeezed Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing beside us when others wouldn't. For believing in us." Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the evening sundae. "I just followed Emily's lead," he admitted. "She showed more courage than I've had in years. When those rumors started..." He paused, remembering those dark days when it seemed easier to give up. Emily never stopped believing things would get better. "That's because Daddy always says God doesn't give us more than we can handle," Emily chimed in, leaning against her father's shoulder. "And he gave us each other to handle it together." Miguel, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "My mama says the same thing. That God sends angels when we need them most." He smiled shyly at Emily. "You were our angel." The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Families started packing up their containers, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Children chased fireflies that had begun to emerge, their small lights blinking like earthbound stars. Daniel watched as Emily and Miguel joined the other kids, their silhouettes dark against the sunset. Rosa helped gather their dishes, her movements unhurried, comfortable in the knowledge that she belonged here now. They settled back on the blanket, the four of them together, watching the sky transform. Emily crawled into Daniel's lap, just as she used to do when she was smaller. "See, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice full of satisfaction. "My lunch really did change our lives." Daniel hugged her close, breathing in the scent of playground dust and strawberry shampoo. Around them, the park was peaceful, filled with the soft murmur of conversations, distant laughter, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the cooling evening air. In that moment, surrounded by his expanded family and their supportive community, Daniel felt a completeness he hadn't known in years. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across their blanket, and Daniel held his daughter close, grateful for the pure and simple wisdom of a child's heart that had brought them all together. Before we open that door, tell me your theory in the comments who's on the other side. If this story stirred something in you, tap subscribe and follow so you never miss the next chapter, and click the next video to continue their journey. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what moment in this story spoke to your heart today? If you believe the world needs more stories about compassion, courage, and second chances, please subscribe, follow, and share this with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Your comments, your kindness, and your perspective help this community feel like family. Until we meet again, may you feel seen, valued, and inspired. And may your next small act of kindness change a life.